So this is really for students that are going from 301 to 414, or for students that are going from 414 into 424. So this is good because this will apply to you, since you're going into 414, but there's also going to be stuff here that, would be good for you to know, for when you're going into 424. And by what I mean by those numbers is your first student teaching placement, right? That's the course number for it, and then your second student teaching placement. So uh so you can see all this, okay, the PowerPoint, all that.
Yeah.
All right, gotcha. So so things that you're going to get out of this essentially, right? So we're going to talk about some of the basic components, things that you would include in your resume. I'm going to talk a little bit about the New York State teacher certifications, how you would use some key resume terms, what the difference is, right, between a 301 resume versus a first student teaching placement resume, second student teaching placement resume, and then even a little bit about what a teaching resume would look like. Um, and then finally, right, kind of related to that is I'm going to tell you a little bit about how you can update this resume long into the future, right? So as long as resumes are still around, you're probably going to be, having some version of your resume until you essentially retire, right? So until resumes go away, this is probably going to be with you, for your whole career. Um, so some general resume writing tips, right? As you might remember, were you at the orientation?
Yes, I was.
Okay, gotcha. So, right, I didn't put it in red and white this time, but definitely, right, you really want to be using Word, to write this resume. I believe I mentioned it causes issues with the margins, with the spacing, and even though it may look right using one thing, it doesn't using another. The other issue here, so like, it looks right in Docs, and then you download it as a Word document, and then now none of it looks like how you envisioned it when it was in Docs. Um, Pages is even worse. With Pages, we can't even see lines on it, like whole strings of text are just gone. The other issue is that not even just right for the purposes of when you're trying to get help with your resume, but also when it comes to actually using it to apply for things like student teaching, like jobs, right? So, schools still, at least in terms of offices in schools, they're still using professional word, a word processing software, which is Microsoft Word, right? They're, at least in terms of office staff, they're really not using things like Docs. So you want to be, using Word for that reason, so that you're at the employer level, right? You're not, a student that is using Docs. It's great for, you know, collaboration and things like that when you're working with friends on projects, all that stuff. But when you're actually trying to really create a document that's going to be seen in sort of the professional world, really want to be using Word, for that reason, as well as there are also these application tracking systems. These are things where essentially, have you ever applied for a job where you had to copy everything that you had in a resume and paste it into the job application? Like,
Yeah.
has that ever been, right? It's like the most annoying task on earth,
Yeah.
after you just spent all that time on the resume. So what that's doing is it's trying to pull in all kinds of information and keywords, so that um, so that employers can just search by what you've entered into those fields. And then eventually, right, they'll look at your resume. What's happening now, though, more and more, is people can just upload their resume, and especially with the use of AI and all of that, it's able to just read your resume and pull out, right, all of these all these terms for you. But what happens is the more you switch back and forth in terms of, well, first it was in Pages, then it's in Docs, and it's a PDF, then I switched it back to Docs, then, because I wanted to edit it, and then I switched it back to PDF, all that, it's causing files to get corrupted and you don't know it. So it looks fine to you, but then when you upload it, it's now not even readable by these application systems. And so then it looks like, you made a mistake and there's no resume there, so they're not going to bother continuing. So again, really important. I would stick with Word and try, when you go to apply, all right, make it a new document, save it as a new document so it's something that's nice and fresh and you're not switching back and forth, so you don't have that issue. But anyway, outside of my little soapbox about Word, I'll keep going here. So you want to write your resume in a reverse chronological style. So that's just going to mean that within each section, right, you want to have your resume having the most recent information first. So for example, right now you're at St. Joe's. So St. Joe's, if you had been to multiple schools, St. Joe's is going to be the first one on there because that's the most recent. Or your current student, your current fieldwork placement, right? That's going to go at the top of the teaching section, teaching experience section of your resume. When you have a new job, right? That's also going to go at the top, but in your work experience section. So yes, most recent goes first, but only within a section. So I'm actually going to pause there just for a second so that I can show you. So say like within teaching experience here, right, you have, so the name of the school, all right, that's going to be the most recent one. Then your second most recent, third most recent, etc. Then for work experience, right, this one is going to be the most recent one. But let's say you had a job before that, right, then your second most recent one will go below that, and so on. So you want to be really careful with your spelling and grammar on your resume, on your cover letter, especially as an educator, right? So, it'd be one thing if maybe you were, I don't know, maybe an engineer or you're in computer science. I mean, really, no one should be having these errors on their application materials. But since you're going to school to be an educator, right, you need to be able to indicate. You may know the difference, but you need to be able to indicate the difference between there, and there. And if you make the mistake, even though someone could ask you, you could explain exactly what the differences are. If you just make the typo of using the wrong there, it's an immediate kind of red flag. It doesn't show good attention to detail. And again, as an educator, the idea is that you're going to be teaching students how to write, among other things, and things like the difference between there, and there. So if you make that mistake, it's not going to give, a principal much confidence in wanting to keep reading their resume, keep reading your cover letter. So just be careful is really the main point there. You also want to have a consistent font style and point size. You never want to go below 10-point font. Something like Calibri, 12 point. 10 is okay. I mean, 10 is cutting it very close. 11's all right, 12 all right. If you really had to, you could go to 10, but never go below 10. It's so hard to read. And the only other exception would maybe be your name. Maybe your name you could have, say, bolded and 14 to 16, right? Maybe just a little bit larger than the rest of the text, but that's about it. Resume should definitely be no more than 2 pages. Ideally, when it comes to looking for a job, you're not going to have as many things on there. So you may even have a 1-page resume by the time you're looking for a job. But right now, since you've so much field work, right, it's expected for you to have a 2-page resume, just no more than 2 pages. You also want to have a professional file name when you save your resume. So, You don't want it to be, I hate resume writing #1, right? You want it to be, something like, your name, the position you're applying for, and maybe the school or the district, right? Um, Keep in mind your resume is going to be this constant work in progress. Like I'm saying, right? It was, you started working on it a bit in 301, then you have 414, 424. You're going to be using it to look for jobs. 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line, your resume is going to keep changing. Excuse me. And also, your resume is even going to change depending on the job that you're applying for. So, it's not to say that it's going to be drastically different every time, but let's say you're applying for a job that they emphasize certain things in their job description, right? You're going to want to use that resume to, maybe switch some of the language, some of the words in there so that it more closely matches the words that are used in the job description. Maybe even some synonyms of some of the words that are used in the job description. And again, some of that has to do with those application tracking systems because it's looking for certain keywords. The other thing is that even if it is just going directly to a person who's going to read it, right, it's just going to kind of make you sound like you're already doing the things, or you've already done many of the things that a job is going to be looking for because you're literally using, right, many of those words. Keep in mind, it shouldn't be a group project, and that's not because I want to, make it more difficult or anything. It's just that if you're working on it with someone, like with a friend, it can end up having it where your bullet points sound the same. And then now, they're sending resumes out, and now it just sort of looks like, that everyone's just sort of copying each other. So it's not going to look good for you. So, so that's why I just say that. Also, I know I think you've been working with the other counselors, so, certainly, you're always welcome to have, to have your resume reviewed. Um, and then, your resume should be printed on high quality resume paper if you're going to be in a situation where, let's say you go on an interview, right, for your student teaching placement, you would want to have a copy of your resume printed up. You can go on Amazon, buy some resume paper, and it will probably last you most of your career, right? Um, yes, most things are digital, but in an interview, you may be in a situation where there's, yes, everyone should have a copy of your resume, but maybe there's a third person, right, on the interview that was supposed to be there. They're out sick, they have someone else fill in for them, and now you look even more prepared because you have a copy of your resume, right, for that person. Another situation where you would have it printed out would be something like a job fair. So those are just kind of some general tips, right? But let's get into really the meat of it here. So the difference here between 301, 414, 424. So in 301, it was the class assignment, and it was to help you have kind of this solid foundation of a resume so you can just really update it right as you go along. Um, what that means is that your objective at the top, right, in 301 was very different from what it is in 414. So in 414, your objective is really to get your general education student teaching placement. In 424, your objective is going to be to get a special education student teaching placement, right? So, that's the biggest thing you want to be updating right away is going to be that objective statement. And that's going to vary as you go throughout. The other thing is that, right, you're going into your first student teaching placement, but when you go into 424, you're going, or when you're about to go into 424, right? So basically this time next semester, you'll already be a student teacher. So your present position at that point is going to be a student teacher. So you just want to make sure that you update your resume in the future to indicate, right, that your present position is student teacher, because all of your other positions under teaching experience, they're all going to say fieldwork participant. But for right now, since you're going into 414, right, all those teaching experience positions that are on there, they should all say fieldwork participant. And then finally, what else is different is you. So let's say maybe your graduation date, that you're planning on, right? Maybe that moved back since last semester, maybe that moved forward since last semester. Maybe, maybe you, because chances are, right, you probably finished a fieldwork placement last semester. And so, depending on where you're at with your resume from last semester, you would have to, put the end dates on that. You would also have to put any end dates on jobs that you stopped since then, and then end dates on any clubs or organizations that you're no longer involved with as a member, or if you had a leadership position in a club or something, you would also, if that ended, right, then you would have the end date for that. Likewise, anything that is new, you're also going to want to add. So your current student teaching placement, or I'm sorry, your current fieldwork placement, right? That wouldn't have been on there last semester when you were working on your resume. So so you would want to have that on there. Any new job that will go on, any new experience in in clubs or organizations. And then again, right down the line, this time next semester, you're going to do the same thing, right? So like I mentioned, you'll have your student teaching experience that will go on, your fieldwork placement this semester, right? That would have ended, so you'll update that and so on. And really, it's just going to be doing this, right? Every time you're starting a new job somewhere, anything like that, right? This is kind of the general formula where you want to be updating your resume.
I
Uh,
actually have a
yeah,
question about that.
yes, definitely.
So I was in a sorority on campus, Alpha Gamma Delta,
Okay,
but I recently dropped this past semester. So do
sure.
you think that would be something I should add on to my resume? Like
Yeah,
the
so
it
yeah, because was it on your resume previously?
it was, and
Okay,
I did have a leadership position in there. I was the
right.
event planner, so
Right, gotcha. Okay, yeah, no, I would definitely have it on there.
okay,
And then, yeah, you just want to put the end date on, so just like the month and year, would be
okay,
fine. So,
perfect. Thank
actually, even, for clubs and stuff, you could even just put the year, right, as the end date.
you.
Um, the only situation, maybe you might go with the month and the year would be if the position that you held was really substantial to the point that, you could write lots of good bullet points about it.
Okay,
And if you had the space, right, within your resume to,
right.
to have those
To
bullet.
edit.
Otherwise, if it's really just like, okay, I was this, it was this organization, I had this position, you can just have kind of year started to year ended, and that's okay.
Okay,
Um,
thank you.
it would really only be, sure, it would really only be the month and the year if you were deciding to kind of break it out as its own position, kind of like the way that this is written out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you would handle that.
Okay.
So, so generally speaking, right, you want this in reverse chronological order. You're gonna list the grades. So let's say, you're probably observing at least maybe two grades in some of your placements, right? So you can just say, grades say 1 and 2, right? Or grades, 2 and 4, right? And then you want to use these bullet points to really describe, right, what it is that you've done for your field, right? So, um, the thing that's really going to help separate you, the thing that's going to help you get that student teaching placement that you want, it's going to help you to, get that sub position, that permanent sub, that leave replacement, and then ultimately, right, having a classroom of your own. When it comes to resumes, the thing that's going to matter the most is going to be these bullet points, right? So that's really the thing that's going to separate you, because everyone, is going to have everyone else that you're kind of up against, right? They're going to have, some level of certification. But it's really about, well, what did you do, right? With your opportunities, with your fieldwork, with your student teaching placement. So one thing to consider actually is going to be that as you're going to go into student teaching next semester, keep a journal and just write down, right? Just write out, just tasks, right? Things that you did maybe that day, maybe that week. It will really help you to keep track of what your actions were. Because it's very tricky, right? To come up with bullet points for something when it's like a thing that you do it every day, and it's hard to really, you know, think about, kind of like see the big picture of it, right? So it's almost like, if you're trying to look at a mural, right? A giant mural, but you are, your face is like an inch away from it, right? You're too close to it. You're too involved in it to really see the big picture of what you're doing. So before you kind of just get like sucked into the semester and all of that next semester, what I would say is definitely, right, each day just try and write down different things that you were doing, things that worked really well, lessons that you were giving, students that you feel like you really helped, right? Anything like that. Just to help you when it comes time to update it. So um, because you're really going to want to be trying to cite examples of your achievements, right? So that's what, if you've seen the template, right, that's what I talk about with results. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that. Um, you want to make sure you're going to use the proper tense. So if it's something that you're presently in, right, if it's a job that you currently have, then, technically you would write it in present tense verbs. But you want to make sure that if it's something you don't have anymore, right, something that you're not working in anymore, that you remember to go in and change the verbs to be past tense. One way around this is to just be consistent and just make it all past tense, because what you did today, even if it's a current job, you also probably did yesterday, right? So it's okay to make it all past tense. Just avoid being in a situation where you have something that is written in present tense that you're no longer doing, right? So, um, so let me give you some more examples here. So again, with these bullet points, you're really trying to market yourself, right? You want to really describe your achievements and ultimately the value that you're bringing to the school, the value that you're bringing to your students, right? And what are they getting out of it? What's the impact that you're having? So, things like, maybe improving a student's reading comprehension, enriching their learning environment, enhancing their engagement with, lessons and materials, keeping them on task, right? Things like that. Um, so you're really trying to kind of spell out, right, what are the benefits? So, like I said, it's tricky. So I have some strategies here that can help you. So, remember that you're a fieldwork participant, right? You're not an observer. The issue with observer is that it kind of gives the feeling when someone's reading it, like you're sort of, tucked away in the corner, almost like hidden, right? And not really active, not really doing anything with students, not helping students. So we know that, in almost every placement, you're getting a chance to at least have some interaction, right, with students. So any interaction that you've had with students is something that you can use to make a good bullet point. So for example, right? I mean, ideally, you're maybe you taught a lesson, maybe you're helping the students at centers, you're doing all kinds of things like that. You're redirecting distracted students, anything like that. But it could even be something as simple as like, you're getting to know them a little bit. You're trying to kind of develop a relationship, build rapport with them, right? And kind of make them feel comfortable with you, as kind of a trusted adult, right, in the school. So, maybe it's, that you were talking with them, about, their favorite subject, their favorite topics, anything like that, because you're trying to really build a rapport, right? And that's what I mean by any interaction, because a lot of times, and it's understandable, right? Students think, meaning college students, right? They think that they don't really do anything in these. But the more when you really break down, like what did I do from when I came in to when I left, right? There's usually something there that you can use to help make some bullet points. And these are things, by the way, that teachers do, right? Teachers get to know their students. So they talk with them about, what their weekend was like. Did what their favorite things are, right? Things like that, because a teacher is also trying to connect with them. So the overall goal of all of this is to make it so that when someone reads your bullet points, even if you were to black out fieldwork participant or student teacher, right? They would read your bullet points and they would think, oh, that sounds like a teacher, right? So you're trying to project teacher vibes here so that this way they really, it comes across like, oh, well, you're already doing these things where you've been, so now you can do these things where you want to be, right? At whatever it is that you're applying for. Um, so, that's why your bullet points are really going to be about what you did and not what you learned or not what you observed. Um, you also want to try and paint a picture for the reader. So you want to give some details, right? You don't want to be writing, a paragraph for a bullet point, but just some details that give them a sense of kind of what you were working on. So, yes, you help them with math, but how did you help them with math, right? What was kind of your strategy, right? Did you kind of ask them questions, to try and kind of guide them, toward the answer, right? Or to guide them toward realizing the answer. So oftentimes what I try and think about with students when we have an appointment is something like, if I were to walk by the classroom, what would they see you doing, right? What would it look like step by step? Or if you had to, tell someone how to do something, right? How to do something to help a student, much like you did to help a student, right? How would you break that down? What would you suggest that they do? So these are just kind of general strategies to help you think about, right, what are the ways that you can sort of pull out, right, these solid bullet points that you have, because you're doing good work in the classroom and we want you to be able to show it on a resume. And then for the results aspect of this, right? Because remember, you want to have that action verb, you want to have these details about what it was that you were working on, and then you want to have a result. And the result, you can also think of it as an impact, a purpose, right? The idea is just to kind of show what is the value that you provided that student, right? What did they get out of it? If not for you being there, right? And if no one else had kind of stepped in, right, what would have happened? And then you take that idea and you flip it, right? So, in other words, if you hadn't, redirected a student who was being disruptive or something like that, and no one else did, right, then what would happen? And so when you look at that, you can see, oh, well, it would have been, they would have been distracting everyone else. So what did you do? What was the result of that? The result was that you kept that student on track, right? With the lesson, right? Things like that. Another way to think about this, and this is just, these are all, you know, this from teaching, right? From your courses that, sometimes it helps to kind of say the same thing in different ways using different methods. So this is another way that you can think about this too, would be something called the RAP method, right? The idea is that you want to have a result that you achieved based on the action that you took, which is in response to the problem or the project that you faced. So in this example, right? So collaborated, right? That's an action verb, right? With a cooperating teacher to create, right? That's actually another action verb. You only need one, but in this case, right, two works fine as well. A new reading area for a library, the new reading area for a library, that's what I mean by having those details, right? By really saying what it is that you were doing. You can also think of that as a project or a problem, because in that instance, right, the project was that you uh, created a reading area for the library. And then your result here is going to be, you can even say it, right? I wouldn't say for every single bullet point, but resulting in an increase in student reading. So maybe when students, had this kind of special place to go, right? Maybe you notice that they were reading more because they would go there, they would feel important, they'd feel special, they'd want to read, right? So some more examples of RAP, and let me zoom in here so you can see these better. So maybe it's, designed and produced a series of smartboard presentations. So designed and produced, right? Those are action verbs. And then series of smartboard presentations, that's that detail that gives someone an idea, right? It gives someone a flavor for what it was that you're really doing in that classroom. Again, the other way you can think of it is that's the project that you're working on. And then your result here to enhance student learning of the living environment, meaning that those presentations, right, it was about the living environment, and the students were, they were kind of expanding, right, their knowledge of that. Um, again, established and implemented, applied behavior analysis plan with the student. Now, maybe you didn't do that entirely, but maybe you did something that contributed to it. So maybe, for example, you were supposed to see what the student was doing in the classroom, and if you saw that they were doing the right thing, right, then maybe you would go to them and give them a sticker or put a sticker on a chart, right? Anything like that, where it's going to show that that you were kind of, providing reinforcement, right, to that student. Um, and then you could say, by utilizing a sticker chart or sometimes you get a toy if you do, X number of things, get a thing from the chest, all these things, right? All those details are things that really make it feel like someone is in the classroom with you, right? As they're reading that resume, they're seeing you like you're the teacher, right? So that's the main point there. Um, so some other things that you can consider on here would be things like work experience. And that's going to be very similar, right? You still need to create bullet points for it, all that. But a lot of times, students will think like, well, I have a retail job, I have food service job. How does that relate to teaching? And the thing that I always like to say is if you can handle either of those, you can handle a classroom full of screaming kids. So uh, if you have a job that is not immediately relevant, right? There are ways that you can tweak it to sound similar to teaching. So maybe you didn't teach, but you trained. So you had to train someone how to do something, for the first time. So that's why we have things about, training a new cashier, right? Maybe you had to communicate professionally with customers. Well, you're going to have to communicate professionally, in the classroom, right? You're going to have to maintain composure in the classroom, right? Um, maybe you're providing customer service. Well, you got to deal with parents. Parents aren't always happy, right? So, you need to know how to handle those situations. And so by being able to use experience like that, right, that's something that you can use to relate to teaching. Obviously, things that are more relevant to childcare, or I'm sorry, to education, to children are going to be better. It's a more direct, um, application, but you can still, tweak things a little bit, even if it's not directly that. So anything like childcare, camp counselor, if you were school volunteer or coach, if you're doing aftercare, anything like, scope, universal pre-K stuff, right? If it were anything like that, teaching assistant things, if you've, subbed, right? Anything like that. These are really also the jobs that you want to be trying to get if you're working now. You want to try and start, sooner than later, getting more experience working with kids, and less of things like this if you can. But again, even if you only have this, right, there's still ways that you can really tailor it again to teaching, which goes to the point that if we can make this, right, sound like teaching, then you want to be tailoring all of your bullet points, all of your stuff on your resume to not just sound like your last teaching placement, but to sound like the current teaching position that you're applying for, right? Um, again, other things, so, campus and community involvement, you mentioned you have that, so that's good to have on there. You would just, state the organization, right? So organization, so here it's Project Sunshine, your position, and, it could just be the year, and that's fine. Um, other things that would go on there would be under the section, if you look on the template, the section of skills and professional development. So that would be, if you had a teaching assistant certification, that would go over there. That wouldn't go under the initial teaching certification section at the top. If you're CPR certified, right, something like that, that would go down on skills and professional development. Maybe if you have volunteer experience, that would go more up by the sort of either campus or, community involved. Um, other things that would go under professional development would be things like if you had Virtus training, right? If you completed that, you'd put Virtus training in the year. If you did your fingerprinting, you would put down, fingerprint clearance in the year. Um, if you studied abroad, that would go under education. So you just kind of want to think about, right, do I have any of these things? Which things apply? Finally, when it comes to skills, you want to list not so much, the soft skills of kind of teamwork or communication, right? For those things, that's what you want to show your ability in the bullet points of jobs, right? Like the way we had even in that example before, communicated profession, right? But the skills instead that go here are going to be things like, how skilled you are using Word, using Docs, with smartboard technology, maybe with PowerPoint, with Excel, with any kind of educational technology. So, Kahoot, things like that. Um, so that would go on there for skills. If you knew a language other than English and you really knew it well, that will go on there as well. And you'll see on the template, we have it broken down where we tell you, so if, you're just kind of, your way around the user interface a little bit of some software, okay, maybe we're going to say that you're familiar with it. If you work with it fairly regularly, then you're going to say you're experienced with it. And if you know it so well that you could teach someone else how to use it, then you would use a term like proficient. So you can almost think of it as kind of familiar with as low, right? Proficient is really high in terms of skill level, and then experience with is sort of in the middle there. As far as language goes, right, for that, if you only like, I only know how to say hello and goodbye in Spanish, and maybe whatever vocab I can remember from high school, right? Um, I'm not really at a level that would count. So for languages, it would have to be you need to either be conversational, where you can speak it fairly well and really carry on a conversation with someone in, in the language that's not English. Fluent, you can speak it, read it, write it. And then if you're a native speaker, then it would just mean that, right, you grew up with it in your, in your home, in your childhood home, so you really know it well. So a few things to keep in mind with all of this, right? Again, resume is always going to be changing, should always reflect the position that you're applying for and how you match that position, right? But be careful. There's always stories about, someone, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later, it turns out they, lied on their resume, they embellished all that. So it needs to be accurate, right? But many times you're going to see a description of a job and you're going to say, well, that applies to me. Yeah, I know how to do that. I've experienced with that, right? So that's where you're trying to match what you bring to the table to what they're looking for. Again, your resume should be professional. That's why we're going through all this stuff. It's to really help set you off on the right foot for doing this. Again, it's always going to be changing. And right now it can be 2 pages. In the future, it's likely going to go down to 1 page because your biggest, most relevant achievements are going to be done in your student teaching. And then again, it's going to be changing, right? Even just next semester. So a few things just to let you know about. Are you familiar with OLAS at all? Okay, so OLAS it's an excellent place to look for really many different education jobs, right? So it's not just teacher, but it's also teacher assistant. It's, sometimes leave replacements, it's subbing, right? So that's something that you should definitely get involved with. You can have your resume on there, you can have a cover letter on there. So it's a great place, probably the best starting point to look for jobs, down the line, maybe over the summer, right? Things like that. Other things to keep in mind would be your keep in touch with the New York State Education Department. We have links there because they are the ones that are determining if you've met the requirements for certification. Remember, to get certified as a teacher, right, you need more than just graduating with the degree. You need more than graduating with the degree and doing student teaching, right? There's exams and other things that you have to do. And, things do change. So just keep up to date with what the requirements are, because the thing you're really looking to get right now is going to be your certification. And to get your certification, yes, you have to have your degree. Yes, you have to have all these other things. Other sources for jobs for the future would be Eastern Suffolk BOCES, Western Suffolk BOCES, also, the New York City Department of Education. I know it's the city, and chances are, you, like most people who are going to school in Patchogue, you probably live in Suffolk. But even if it were just getting started, right? You have Queens right there. It may be a good option, even if it's just a start. And then finally, you also have the option down the line of potentially even teaching in other states. New York State has some of the strictest, most kind of most high standards in terms of teaching certification. So you bring a ton of qualifications that would blow many other applicants out of the water, right? Who are in other states who didn't have to do anywhere near as much as you did. So again, something maybe, if necessary, something to think about in the future. And then, right, obviously, you can always come to us if you need help with resumes, cover letters, looking for jobs, you're trying to consider grad programs because, eventually you're gonna have to have a master's and all that. So we can, help you with applications for that in terms of, the application essays. We can help you kind of, get an understanding of the grad school application process, all that in the future. I know it's not, necessarily here yet, and your main focus is student teaching, but just to kind of let you know.